Okay, on that note, let's also address the other big important commodity mover, and that's base metals. Aluminium, in fact, touched a fresh 2-year low in the week gone by. Like I said, below $2,000 per ton. Weak China data, as well as the will they, won't they factor between the US-China trade talks, is something that has been one of the key points to watch out for base metals. Let's introduce Alistair Ramsay, the head of research for metals and mining with Fast Markets. Alistair, thanks so much for joining in on ET Now. Two big factors really played out in the week gone by. One is, of course, the weakness in the Chinese trade data, and secondly being the US-China trade talks. We did see aluminium prices skid below $2,000 per ton in the LME markets. How do you see prices move specifically for aluminium going forward?
Yes, it's an interesting one that aluminium fell below $2,000, as you say, Mubina, and it would appear as if the next sort of support lines, if you will, might be even lower than the 1980 dollar per ton mark that we saw around the time of the first sanctions on Rusal. We've got a slightly firmer picture for aluminium going forward. However, we don't really see too much negativity in the price through the next quarter, and in fact we're anticipating that as the fundamental factors really kick in and start to drive sentiment, we'll see prices rising slowly but surely through 2019, almost in fact catching up with the levels we expect to be recorded in 2018.
Interesting you say that, Alistair, because on one side we do have the alumina prices, which had seen a lot of volatility post Norsk Hydro, and now Alunord, Norsk Hydro are saying that they are going to do their best to bring back output to 100% of their capacity. So that is something that sort of caused alumina prices to fall. And up until now, many were saying that whatever price move you are seeing in aluminium is more of a cost push. So if Norsk Hydro comes back, we are going to see again some pressure come in on aluminium prices. Secondly, the China data, that as well has been pointing to weakness. Demand from China, if that dwindles, it's not going to bode well for the metals market. So what fundamental factors exactly are you talking about when it comes to aluminium? Is it purely going to be smoothening of US-China trade talks?
Mubina, these are fantastic questions. I think when it comes down to data, it's really how you interpret it. So, we at Fast Markets are kind of fundamental market analysts, and so we take a lot into account when it comes to the way data is reported and what it actually means. So if you sort of observe the headlines on manufacturing activity, it's regularly the year-on-year change slowing down that seems to drive sentiment. But from a fundamental perspective, what we're really seeing is that automotive production, for example, is rising strongly, as it always does through Q4. The fact it's down from a year ago is kind of immaterial, really, to the fundamental conditions. I'm not saying it's not a factor in sentiment, because quite a lot of people seem to observe data and read it on this year-on-year basis, but these are seasonal markets, and in the Q4 you have a very, very strong Chinese activity in manufacturing. You have a slowdown in things associated with outdoor construction, such as steel products and related, copper wiring, etc. But from the manufacturing perspective, we see the data as strong. We don't read it as negative, and we suspect that the strength in Chinese manufacturing will endure yet again through 2019. So when it comes to the fundamental picture trending forward, we would argue, unlike your contacts before, really, with Alunord, etc., is that there are some demand side drivers. There's a demand pull argument in aluminium, and it spreads right throughout the base metals space. So with a strong demand picture ahead, so there should be a demand pull for supply, and that should support prices.
So Alistair, what you're trying to say is that, please do correct me if I'm wrong, but essentially the data that we have been getting in, like for example, even in China, after that contraction in the previous month, and then just about 50.1 is where the manufacturing index came in last month, the situation does not seem that bad, is it?
That's right. You know, a lot of the manufacturing data that you'll see is seasonally adjusted. So a month-on-month change is not really what you think a month-on-month change is. The month-on-month change at the moment is very positive because this is what happens in the Chinese market for seasonal reasons. September is a much stronger month than August. October much stronger than September, and the fact that through a seasonal adjustment you see some sense of a slowdown, that's all very good, but it doesn't reveal too much about the fundamentals today.
Okay, well, be that as it may, but for now, of course, the aluminium markets are certainly reacting to the sentiment, and we did see them fall to a 2-year low. But it's an interesting perspective, Alistair, that you gave in fundamental analysis in a pure way on how exactly these data points are calculated and how they may be indicating a picture that may not be indicated in terms of pure numbers. But Alistair, great to have you with us on the show. Thanks so much for giving in your perspective as well on this one. But before I let you go, very quickly, I also want to ask you about nickel prices. Throughout the year, we've seen a lot of volatility in nickel prices too. We've had different commodity players. Glencore, for example, said that it did see significant structural deficits continuing in the nickel market. So it touched a multi-month low, and then again there was a strong rebound. So what exactly is the demand-supply picture for nickel right now?
It's quite confusing, and again it's this interaction between sentiment and fundamentals which can sometimes be a little bit disconnected. For example, right now, it's still the case that with nickel, stainless steel is the primary driver of nickel consumption. So from the demand for nickel perspective, the battery raw material aspect is something to think about in the longer term. It's not so much of a crunch issue today, but it's the sentiment around that longer term crunch issue which seems to be impacting the price of nickel. Again, I think the perspective is wrong from a fundamental point of view. The fundamentals of nickel are very strong, and that's very clear for everyone to see when they look at stock drawdowns. They look at demand increasing and the fact that supply is increasing not so much. We expect a very big deficit for nickel of around about 100,000 tons this year in the market, and that's the same that we expect next year as well. So fundamentally, nickel is very strong, and in our perspective, it's just a question of time. We think the short term, that the fundamental picture will be reappreciated, if you like, in the nickel price. At the moment, obviously, there's much bigger issues concerning the sentiment and the prices of nickel. But fundamentally speaking, nickel is very strong.
Okay, just to wrap up our discussion, Alistair, we are talking at a time when it looks like US-China trade talks may be successful, though of course capricious to say the least is what defines Donald Trump. But for now, it looks like maybe the trade talks may be progressing well. How much of a bearing do successful trade talks have on base metals?
Oh, it's massive. I mean, when you think of the nickel market in particular, we were talking about prices of $15,000 a ton not so long ago, and then suddenly we're slipping under $12,000 very quickly. Fundamentally, nothing's actually happened. So what's really going on? It's obviously the politics concerning trade talks, trade wars. It's a huge concern to the base metal markets, and clearly in the case of zinc and in the case of nickel, it's a massive driving force today. So by virtue of that impact that we've seen so far, if you're right, Mubin, and let's hope that that's the case, that trade talks and trade issues and trade wars dissipate in the short term. So we should anticipate an upward correction in the base metal prices which have been affected by such fears of a trade war.
All right, Alistair, great to have you with us. Thanks so much for joining in on ET. Now, it's a very interesting perspective you gave us on base metals. He's positive on aluminium, not too worried about the data points we've been getting in. Nickel too looks like fundamentally it's set for a good uptick. It's more or less of a bullish call on base metals by Alistair Ramsay.